Hey everyone, welcome to Life Glitched, the channel where I share first-person stories about betrayal, hard wake-up calls, and the exact moment someone finally decided they've had enough. If you like long, honest stories that feel like they could be your own, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification because what you're about to hear is how one morning text message just after 6:45 a.m. burned down a family I'd been funding for years and pushed me to walk away with nothing but my peace and my dignity. Now, turn up the volume and let's begin.
My name is Adrian Blake. I'm in my mid-40s. And the morning everything changed, I was in the kitchen tying my work boots. Thinking about a trip to Europe I thought I was taking with my wife and the two kids I'd helped raise for almost a decade. My phone buzzed twice on the counter, and I picked it up expecting some boring schedule change from the airline or maybe a weather alert. But instead, there was a short text from my wife, Natalie, that rewired my entire life in 3 sentences. Change. Plans. You're staying home. The kids want their real dad on the Europe trip. Victor will take your place. I read it once, then again, and a third time to make sure I wasn't half asleep. Same words every time. No apology, no explanation, just a cold little memo like I was an employee being reassigned instead of the man who'd paid for those tickets. I set the phone back on the counter and stared at the coffee maker while the little red light blinked patiently. My hands were steady, and that surprised me, because inside something huge had just snapped into place. I poured coffee into my travel mug, sat down at the kitchen table, and looked around at the place where, 6 months earlier, we'd sat with a calendar and planned this family vacation, where I'd done the math on hotel prices and museum passes, and where I'd volunteered for extra shifts at the tile plant, so I could pay for flights I'd finally bought just the week before. Flights, it turned out, that didn't include me anymore. The apartment was too quiet. Natalie had left the day before with her son Ethan and her daughter Lily to stay at her sister Claire's place before their international flight in the morning. And I had been the one talking about how excited I was to see old streets, museums, and little cafes with them. Not anymore. I unlocked my phone and opened our banking apps. The joint account showed our Europe fund, almost wiped out after 3 tickets had been charged, just under $2,000 each. My personal savings account, the emergency money I've been building for about 5 years, sat untouched because I was the only one who ever put money there. I opened my email and looked at the flight confirmations, all purchased on my credit card, my name on the billing line, and on the passenger list I saw Natalie's name, Ethan's name, Lily's name, and Victor Hale, the ex-husband who had walked out long before I ever met them. I'd only seen Victor once, when he appeared out of nowhere at Ethan's college graduation a few months earlier, smiling and slapping backs like he hadn't been gone for most of his kids' lives. Natalie called it closure, like some kind of healing moment, but I knew exactly what it was and I'd been too polite to say it out loud. I walked over to the window and watched the parking lot fill as people headed to work on a regular weekday. Everyone down there had somewhere to be. I was supposed to be at the industrial ceramics plant in 40 minutes, the job I'd taken 8 years earlier when we needed steady money for school supplies, winter coats, and car repairs. I opened my laptop, went into my financial folders, and pulled up the records I'd kept since my dad first taught me to track every dollar. I had a folder labeled Household Expenses, and when I clicked it open, 8 years of payments stared back at me. Rent payments, all from my account. Utility bills in my name. Car insurance for a vehicle I didn't even pick out. Phone plans for 3 lines, 2 of which weren't mine. Streaming services, subscription boxes, gym memberships for a gym I never set foot in. It was all there, line after line, and I started making a list not because I was furious, but because I needed to see it laid out in black and white. By the time I finished, I counted around 40 separate monthly payments that came out of my pocket alone. 40 different ways I'd been carrying everyone. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Natalie. Don't make a fuss. Victor wants to reconnect with his kids. Try to understand. I typed 5 different replies and deleted each one. Then finally sent the only thing that felt right. Have a good trip. 5 words and a period. No questions, no begging, no argument. Then I called my supervisor and told him I had a family emergency and needed the day. He didn't ask for details, just told me to take care of it. I sat back down at the kitchen table with my laptop, my phone, and 8 years of documentation, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to scream, cry or plead for a place on the trip. I was done being a walking wallet with a heartbeat. I was going to handle this the way you deal with something built on a rotten foundation. Carefully, methodically, and all the way to the end. By the time my coffee went cold, I'd already made my first 3 calls, and I still had more than a dozen to go before lunch. The first call was to the credit card company. I told them I needed to remove an authorized user. The rep asked if there was a problem, and I just said I was simplifying our finances. 4 minutes later, Natalie was off my card. Next, I worked through the streaming services one by one: Netflix, Hulu, the kids' favorite family music plan, every premium thing we had, and canceled them while I watched the cars move in and out of the parking lot below. Every customer service script sounded the same. May we ask why you're canceling? And every time I gave the same line, just cutting back on expenses. By the 5th call, I moved on to the phone plan. 3 lines under my name: mine, Natalie's, and Lily's. The rep explained I could suspend the extra lines instead of canceling. No, I said, go ahead and close the ones that aren't mine. He confirmed I understood that their phones would shut off immediately. I told him that was exactly what I wanted. Then I called our car insurance agent directly, the guy I'd known since high school. I told him I needed to remove a vehicle from my policy: the compact car Natalie drove, the one I'd been paying insurance on since the transmission blew a few years earlier, and I'd helped rescue it. He hesitated, asked if I was sure, reminded me it was my wife's car. I told him I was positive, and he processed it, warning that she'd have to get her own coverage if she wanted to keep driving. I said I understood. After that, I walked into the bedroom and opened the closet. My clothes took up maybe a third of the space. The rest was Natalie's dresses she'd bought for dinners I paid for, shoes that cost as much as my work boots. I didn't touch any of it. I just stood there realizing how much space I'd given up without even seeing it happen. Back at the table, I pulled out a copy of our lease. My name, my signature, and no trace of hers. When we'd moved in 5 years earlier, she'd told me her credit was a mess and asked if I would handle the lease alone. It had bothered me then, but I'd swallowed it. Now it mattered. I called the number for Cardinal Properties, the company that managed the building, and the office manager, Ms. Fraser, picked up. I told her I needed to talk about my lease. She checked my file and said I was paid through the end of the following month, and that if I gave 30 days notice, they could start showing the place. Are you relocating for work? She asked. Something like that, I said. She emailed me the notice form while we were still on the phone. I opened it, signed it digitally, and sent it back before we even hung up. A little later, Ethan texted me from the airport. Dude, my phone just died. What happened? I wrote back. The account was under my name. You'll need your own plan now. The typing bubbles appeared, disappeared, came back. Then finally I got a reply. Seriously? Are you kidding? I didn't answer. Lily messaged a few minutes later with the same confusion, and I gave her the same answer. Then Natalie called. I let it ring, almost a voicemail, before picking up. Her voice was tight, the tone she used when she was furious, but trying to sound composed in public. What are you doing? She hissed. I told her I was adjusting expenses. She said I'd shut off the kids' phones. I told her I'd shut off the lines I paid for, that they were adults and could handle their own bills. She reminded me they were about to leave the country. I told her they'd better get that fixed before boarding. I could hear airport announcements in the background, gate changes and boarding calls. She called me childish. I told her I was being clear. She was the one who'd said she wanted her real family on this trip, and I was simply giving her exactly that. She tried to backtrack, saying that wasn't what she meant, but I hung up. My hand was still steady. My voice hadn't risen once. I felt calmer than I had in years. That afternoon, I canceled the gym membership I never used, the meal kit subscription she loved, the monthly car wash pass for a car I rarely drove because I took the bus most days. By sunset, I'd cut those 40 or so monthly expenses down to 11, all of them mine. I ordered cheap takeout from the corner Chinese place and ate at the same kitchen table, where I'd planned a trip I would never take, scrolling through 8 years of bills that proved I'd been the foundation everyone stood on while pretending I was just part of the decor. My phone stayed quiet the rest of the night. No more calls, no more texts. Fine by me. I had bigger work ahead, the kind that doesn't get undone by apologies or empty promises, the kind that closes doors instead of leaving them half open. The next morning, I called a law firm a coworker had recommended when his brother went through a divorce, Kerr and Associates. I didn't think I was ready for a divorce lawyer yet, but I needed to know my position. The receptionist transferred me to attorney Daniel Kerr, whose voice was calm and all business. I told him the story in under 3 minutes. The text, the trip, the lease with just my name, the bills I've been paying. He asked if we were legally married. I said yes for about 6 years, and that we'd lived together in a common law type situation for roughly 7 years before that. He asked about kids. I told him Natalie had 2, technically adults now. He was quiet while papers shuffled on his end. Then he asked if the apartment and utilities were all solely in my name. I said yes. He told me that gave me every right to move out, terminate the lease properly, and that if things went to court I'd want thorough documentation of every expense I'd covered. I told him I already had it all organized. He said good, told me to keep records of every communication from that point forward, and told me to call him if Natalie filed anything. I thanked him and hung up. About 20 minutes later, Ms. Fraser from the property office called back. She'd already found a young couple interested in the apartment, a pair being relocated for work, and asked if they could see the place that afternoon. I said I'd be there. They arrived at 2, professional and polite, asking practical questions about heating costs and parking. They never asked why I was leaving. Before they walked out, the husband said, "We'll take it. Can we move in on the 1st?" Ms. Fraser agreed, and that night, I signed the paperwork to end my lease and transfer the deposit, leaving the forwarding address line blank for now. After that, the apartment felt different, less like a home, more like a hotel room I'd overstayed. I started packing that same night. It didn't take long. I didn't own much. Some clothes, my work gear, my laptop, a few books. Most of the furniture had already been there when we moved in or had been chosen and paid for by Natalie. The couch, the dining set, the decorative stuff that made the place look put together, none of it felt like mine. In about 4 hours, I had my life condensed into 8 boxes and 2 duffel bags. While I packed, I thought about where they were: museums, cafes, hotel rooms in another country, all on a trip I'd funded. I wondered if Victor was paying for anything or if she'd just assumed I'd keep the money flowing even after getting disinvited like I was a distant cousin. My money was on the second option. Later that night, a text came in from Lily. "Mom says you're being unreasonable. Can you just talk to her?" I sat on the edge of the bed and wrote back that I'd talked to her and that she'd made her choice, and now I was making mine. She shot back, "Are you really going to throw away our family over this?" I stared at that word family for a long moment before replying that they'd thrown it away when they chose their biological father over the man who'd been there for nearly 8 years. I was just finally accepting the reality of their choice. She didn't reply. I kept packing. The next day, I drove out to a storage facility on the east side of the city, climate-controlled, month-to-month contract. I unloaded everything except what I'd need for the next couple of weeks: clothes, toiletries, my laptop. When I slid the door down on that storage unit, I felt lighter than I had in ages. On the way back, I stopped at the post office and set up mail forwarding, not to another apartment, but to a small P.O. box in a town a few communities away called Oak Ridge, a place I'd looked up the night before. Small town, lower cost of living, manufacturing jobs listed online. I'd worked around heavy equipment and kilns for almost a decade. I could do similar work anywhere. Back at the apartment, I sat at the kitchen table one last time and logged in my bank accounts. My savings were barely touched. The joint account was nearly drained, but it didn't matter anymore. I moved the remaining balance into my personal account and closed the joint account altogether. My phone rang. Natalie's name flashed on the screen. I answered. She skipped any greeting and went straight to, "The bank called me. Why did they say our account was closed?" I told her I'd closed my account and that she was free to set up one of her own. She called it crazy, reminded me we were married. I answered, "We were. Past tense. You'll get the paperwork when you're back." There was a pause. Then her voice came back smaller, shaky. "Paperwork? What paperwork?" I said, "Divorce papers. Kerr is handling it." Silence stretched out, and then she whispered, "Are you serious?" I told her I was completely. She demanded to know where I was going to live. I told her it was no longer her concern and that the apartment was already leased to someone else. So she had a couple of weeks after returning to figure out where she and her real family would live. She accused me of putting her and the kids on the street. I told her I was simply freeing her to be with the people she'd chosen and suggested that Victor, being their real father, could help. Then I hung up. The apartment went quiet again. I walked through it one more time. The kitchen where I'd cooked breakfast for people who viewed me as a checkbook, The living room where I sat through shows that meant nothing to me because they made everyone else happy. The bedroom where I convinced myself being used was the same as being loved. The next day, I turned in my keys. That night, I slept better than I had in years. 2 weeks slid by. By the time their plane landed back home, I was already in Oak Ridge, in a small furnished room above a hardware store. The rent was cheap, the walk to my new job at Ironwood Manufacturing was short, and the work metal components instead of ceramic tiles paid a little better. I hadn't given Natalie my new address or number. I hadn't told anyone. The first sign that their world was cracking came through social media. Ethan posted a photo at the airport with a caption like, "Home, I guess," followed by a couple of confused emojis. I didn't like it or comment. I just noted it and moved on. An hour later, Lily posted from the parking lot, "Why is there a moving truck at our building?" I closed the app, made myself dinner, eggs and toast, cheap and simple in mind, and let my phone sit untouched until about 8:30 that night. Then it started exploding. Dozens of missed calls, texts, a handful of voicemails. I let them pile up while I watched the local news on the tiny TV that came with the room. Road work, school board meetings, small stuff that had nothing to do with me. When I finally looked at my phone, there were messages from Natalie demanding I call her back, asking where I was, insisting this wasn't funny. Ethan had messaged, "What the hell, man?" Lily had written a long paragraph that started with, "I can't believe you're doing this to us," and I didn't bother reading the rest. The voicemails all had the same mix of panic, anger, and confusion. I deleted them without listening all the way through. Around 9:15, Natalie tried calling from a different number, probably borrowing someone's phone in case I blocked her. I picked up. She demanded to know where I was, told me there were strangers living in our apartment and their belongings were everywhere. I corrected her. The belongings were hers and the kids'. Mine had been moved days ago. She said I couldn't do this. I told her I already had. She wanted to know where they were supposed to go. I told her that was between her, the adults she called kids, and their father. She blurted out that Victor had bailed, gone back to his hotel a couple of days before the flight home, and then vanished, claiming he had work. His phone went straight to voicemail now. I almost laughed but didn't. Instead I said, "So the man who abandoned his kids once did it again." Shocking. She told me not to be cruel. I said I was just being accurate and reminded her that she'd chosen him. She'd wanted the genuine article, and now she had him, unreliability and all. She said they were staying at Claire's, but there wasn't room for long. She begged me to talk, to fix it. I told her there was nothing to fix. She told me I wasn't part of her real family, and I believed her. Then I hung up. A few minutes later, Ethan messaged again. He said his mom was freaking out, that I'd taken everything. I replied that I'd taken what was mine and left everything else, and that the apartment had been in my name. I wasn't going to keep paying rent for people who didn't want me around. He asked where they were supposed to live. I told him his mother, and his biological father could figure that out. He didn't respond. Lily tried calling later. I let it go to voicemail and didn't listen. Eventually my phone went quiet. I sat in my small room with the window open, listening to Oak Ridge settle in for the night, distant traffic, a dog barking, the hum of the streetlight outside. I thought about them crammed into Claire's place, blaming each other, maybe still trying to reach Victor and getting nothing but silence. I thought about the vacation photos they'd post in museums, cafes, old streets, things I'd paid for without being invited to enjoy. I thought about that first text in the kitchen, change of plans. The kids won their real dad. They'd gotten what they asked for, and now they finally understood what that really meant. I turned off my phone, plugged it into charge, and went to bed. The next morning I woke up early, walked to Ironwood, learned new machines and routines, and started building a life that was small, quiet, and mine. About 3 weeks into the new job, I got an email from Kerr with the subject line, "Notice received." Natalie had filed a motion challenging the lease termination and demanding I cover temporary housing. He attached the documents and a short note. "Weak case. No legal footing. I'll handle it." 2 days later, he forwarded the judge's decision. It was blunt. The apartment had been solely in my name. The lease termination was proper, and I had no obligation to house adult stepchildren or a separated spouse. Kerr added another note. "She might try something else, but she won't win. Keep documenting." I filed the emails in a folder labeled legal and went back to work. My new routine settled in fast. Clock in at 6, clock out mid-afternoon, grab coffee at the little diner on the corner, walk back to my room, read, watch a little TV, sleep, repeat. Nobody in Oak Ridge knew why I'd moved or what I'd left behind. To them, I was just another guy who showed up on time, did his job, and kept mostly to himself. It felt good to be a blank slate. About a month after they got back, Ethan messaged me through social media again. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. He wrote that he understood I was angry about how things started, but that my decision was hurting everyone. Natalie was working a grueling call center job and still barely covering groceries. Lily was couch surfing with friends because they couldn't afford a 2-bedroom, and Victor wasn't answering anyone. He asked if I could help just a little. I read it twice, closed the app, and didn't reply. 2 days later, Lily tried a different approach. She sent a friend request on a platform I rarely used. I declined it. Then she somehow found my email. She wrote that she never meant for any of this to happen, that she'd gotten caught up in the idea of having her dad around again, that she'd thought him being on the trip would be nice, and never really believed I'd actually leave. She asked if we could talk. I stared at her message for a long time before responding that she was in her early 20s. Ethan was mid-20s, both old enough to know better, and that their mother definitely knew better. I told her I'd given 8 years of my life without ever expecting a medal, but I hadn't expected to be traded in the second someone with shared DNA showed up. I said they had wanted their biological father, and now they knew who he really was. It was a brutal lesson, but one they clearly needed. I ended by saying I wasn't angry anymore, just done, and that I hoped they eventually got their lives together, but I wouldn't be part of that process. She replied once more, saying, "So that's it. 8 years and you just walk away?" I sent back, "You walked away first. I just made it official." After that, she went silent. Work kept me busy enough that I didn't check my phone much. The guys at Ironwood were decent quiet, focused. Sometimes I ate lunch with a couple of them, talking about sports or the weather, nothing personal. One afternoon, a coworker named Tony asked if I was from around there. I told him I'd moved to Oak Ridge about a month earlier and that I didn't really have family anymore. He nodded like he understood and didn't pry, and I appreciated that. About 6 weeks after the Europe fiasco, Natalie sent one more long message. This one was different, less angry, more desperate. She wrote about how tough life had become, how she'd underestimated everything, how Victor had completely disappeared and wouldn't answer calls or messages, how Ethan was working 2 jobs just to help cover rent on a dump of an apartment, how Lily had dropped a class because she couldn't afford textbooks. "I made a mistake," she wrote. "I thought having Victor on that trip would make the kids happy. I didn't realize what I was giving up. Please, can we at least talk? I miss you." We all do. I saved the message to my legal folder and didn't respond. A week later, Kerr called to tell me she was trying mediation, hoping to negotiate support. He said she was asking for spousal support and some temporary assistance, claiming financial hardship. I asked how long we'd been legally married. He reminded me, 6 years. I asked if his records showed I'd essentially paid for everything during that time. He said yes. I asked how much she was realistically entitled to under state law. He told me very little, maybe a small temporary sum, but given the circumstances he thought we could fight it down to 0. I told him to do exactly that. The mediation took half an hour over video while I worked my shift. When I got back to my room, Kerr had emailed a summary. Natalie had asked for $2,000 a month, the mediator had floated $500, and Kerr had countered with nothing. They'd settled on 0. Case closed, his email said. Divorce will be finalized in about 60 days. I forwarded the email to my legal folder, cooked myself a simple dinner: rice, chicken, vegetables, and ate in peace. Later I sat by the window looking down at the quiet street as a few cars rolled by and the streetlights flicked on with the setting sun. I thought about that first text, about the choice Natalie and the kids had made, and about the small, uncomplicated life I was building now, with no debts I didn't choose and no one quietly draining me while calling it love. Somewhere across the state, they were figuring out life without someone silently paying the bills. Ethan juggling 2 jobs, Lily crashing on couches, Natalie in a noisy call center wondering how everything unraveled so fast, and Victor proving exactly the kind of man he'd always been. And me? I was exactly where I needed to be, free. A few months after I left, I was in the break room at Ironwood when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something nudged me to answer. A tired-sounding woman's voice asked, "Is this Adrian?" It wasn't Natalie. I asked who was calling. "It's Claire," she said, Natalie's sister. I put my coffee down and asked what she wanted. She said she needed me to understand what I'd done, that her sister was falling apart, working long hours and barely covering food, that Ethan had dropped his certification program to help with rent, that Lily was still sleeping wherever she could, and that Victor had blocked them on everything, even having security escort Ethan out when he tried to show up at his workplace. She called him a coward. I agreed, but told her that was no longer my problem. I said I'd cared for 8 long years, taken extra shifts, cover emergencies, sign leases and loans, and that the second everyone decided they wanted their real dad more than me, I became disposable. So no, I didn't care anymore. Claire said Natalie had made a mistake. I told her Natalie had made a decision, and there was a difference. She said Natalie cried every night and truly regretted what she'd done. I told Claire that was something Natalie would have to live with. Claire called me cold. I corrected her. I wasn't cold, I was clear. I'd spent 8 years being warm, accommodating, and generous, and it had earned me a text uninviting me from a vacation I paid for. I was done being warm. She hung up without saying goodbye. I finished my coffee and went back to work. That night I got an email from Lily. The subject line was, "I'm sorry." She wrote that she doubted I'd even read it, but she had to try. She admitted she'd been foolish, swept up in the fantasy of having her dad around again, that when he showed up at her graduation it felt like maybe he'd changed. He hadn't. He'd vanished again 2 days after they got back from Europe, saying something about work, and then turning his phone off for good. She said it was like he'd never been there at all. She told me she and Ethan had talked a lot about what happened and finally understood what I'd done for them. The bills I'd paid, the stability I provided, all the things they'd taken for granted because they had never had to see the work behind them. She said Natalie was a mess, that she regretted everything, but had never believed I'd truly leave, that none of them had. She said she wasn't asking me to come back, she knew that was impossible, but she wanted me to know they finally understood what they'd lost. I read the email 3 times, then replied that I appreciated her writing and that it did mean something. But understanding what you lost doesn't change the fact that you were willing to lose it. I reminded her of her age, pointed out Ethan's age, and said Natalie absolutely knew better. I told her I hadn't given those 8 years expecting a thank you parade, but I also hadn't imagined they'd replace me the second someone more authentic walked in. I repeated that they had chosen their biological father, and, when he vanished again, they'd finally learned who he really was. I said it was a hard lesson, but one they clearly needed. I finished by telling her I wasn't angry anymore, just finished, that I hoped they all found their footing, hoped Ethan went back and finished his program, hoped Natalie eventually found stability, but that I wouldn't be part of that journey. I told her to take care and hit send. 2 weeks later, the divorce became official. Kerr emailed the paperwork. I signed it digitally and sent it back. No dramatic confrontation, no big scene, just documents confirming the truth that had been real for months. That weekend I drove out to a state park about an hour from Oak Ridge, walked one of the trails, sat beside a small lake, and watched the wind push ripples across the surface. I thought about the man I'd been 4 months earlier, tying his boots in a quiet kitchen, opening a text that told him he wasn't really part of the family he'd funded. I thought about the apartment I'd walked away from, the bills I'd stopped paying, the family that had never fully accepted me as anything but convenient. And I thought about the life I had now, small, calm, manageable, a job I didn't hate in a town where nobody knew my past, a bank account only I could touch. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't raging. I was simply free. A month after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Tony from work in the hardware store below my room while he was picking up paint. He asked if I was settling in. I told him I was, better than I expected. He said I looked different than when I first arrived, lighter somehow. He didn't press for details. That night, I went through my phone and deleted every photo from my old life. The apartment, the vacations, the 4 Smile family dinners where I'd felt like a guest at my own table. I kept one thing, a screenshot of that first text message, the one that said, "Plans changed. You're staying home. The kids want their real dad on the Europe trip." I saved it not as a trophy, but as a reminder not of what I lost, but of what I gained when I walked away. Self-respect, quiet, a life that actually belonged to me. 6 months in Oak Ridge turned into a year. I got a small raise at Ironwood. I started going to a local diner on Friday nights where the waitress learned my usual order. I bought a used truck that ran well enough. I didn't start dating. I wasn't ready, and maybe I wouldn't be for a while, and that was okay. I'd spent 8 years building a foundation for people who treated me like something temporary. Now I was building something permanent just for myself. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Our story has come to an end. If you've stayed with me all the way until now, thank you for listening. If this story hit a nerve or made you think about your own life, consider hitting like, subscribing to Life Glitched, and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss the next tale. I've handpicked a couple of other videos for you on the screen. Click on whichever grabs your attention, and I'll be waiting for you in the next story.